There are moments in life that don't arrive with explosions or sirens. They come quietly, casually, almost lazily, and somehow, they still manage to split you clean in half. Mine came on a Tuesday night, in a living room that was too small for the future I thought I was building. I remember the hum of the refrigerator more clearly than the argument itself. That low, steady sound filling the pauses between our words, like the apartment itself was holding its breath. We'd already gone in circles: money, my job, the promise of something better always just out of reach. I told myself I was calm. Reasonable. But calm is a lie you tell yourself when you're tired of fighting and too scared to admit you're losing. She stood near the door, arms crossed, eyes sharp in a way I didn't recognize anymore. Or maybe I did, and I just hated what it reflected back at me. 6 years, she said. Not loudly. That was the problem. 6 years of almosts. I opened my mouth to defend myself. To explain. To remind her of the plans, the late nights, the risks I took for us. But every sentence sounded thinner in my head than it ever had before, like I'd worn the words down from overuse. Then she said it. You're a loser. The word didn't land like an insult. It landed like a diagnosis. Like she was finally saying out loud what the world had been quietly hinting at for years. Loser. I didn't yell. I didn't slam anything. I just felt something inside me fold, slow and final, like a cheap chair giving out under too much weight. She kept talking, about needing stability, about being tired of believing in potential, but her voice faded into background noise. All I could hear was that word looping in my head, attaching itself to every memory I had of myself. College graduation. Loser. The first job I quit because I thought I could do better. Loser. Every promise I made her that ended with soon. Loser. She walked past me toward the bedroom. I noticed she'd packed efficiently. No hesitation. No doubt. That hurt more than anything she said. At the door she paused. For a second I thought she might soften. Say something human. Something kind. Instead she said, I can't keep betting my life on potential. The door closed behind her with a soft, final click. I stood there longer than I want to admit. Not frozen, just emptied. Like someone had scooped out everything that made me me and left the body behind to figure it out. On the coffee table sat a framed photo from our 2nd anniversary. We were smiling like idiots, arms wrapped tight, convinced we'd cracked some secret code to adulthood. I picked it up and stared at the man in that picture. He looked confident, certain, alive. I didn't recognize him. I pulled the photo from the frame, folded it once, then stopped. I couldn't tear it. Not yet. I slid it into a drawer instead, like hiding evidence of a crime I wasn't ready to confess to. That night, I opened my laptop and stared at a half-written resignation email from weeks earlier. I drafted it during one of my optimistic phases, the kind that always came right before reality punched back. I reread the first line 3 times. Then I closed the laptop. For the first time, quitting didn't feel brave. It felt like proof. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the refrigerator hum and the city breathing through the walls. Somewhere between midnight and morning, a quiet, dangerous thought settled in. Maybe she wasn't wrong. Maybe this small life, this shrinking version of myself, was all I was ever going to be. I didn't know it then, but that word didn't just end my marriage. It rewrote the way I saw myself. And once a man starts believing a story like that, it takes years to remember how to tell a different one. I thought hitting bottom would feel dramatic, like a moment you could point to and say, that's where everything changed. Instead, it felt like waking up the next morning and realizing no one was coming to check on you. The apartment was quieter without her. Not peaceful, just hollow. Every sound echoed longer than it should have, like the walls were reminding me how much space I no longer filled. I slept on the couch because the bed felt like a lie we hadn't finished telling. I told myself this was temporary. Just a reset. A short detour before I got back on track. But days turned into weeks, and weeks started stacking up like unopened mail. I moved out of that apartment 3 months later. Somewhere cheaper. Smaller. A place where the walls were thin and the neighbors kept their lives to themselves. It felt appropriate. I didn't want room to think. I wanted containment. I took a job that didn't ask questions. No interviews about ambition. No conversations about where I saw myself in 5 years. Just show up, do the work, live. I told myself there was dignity in that. And maybe there was. But mostly there was relief. Relief that no one expected anything from me anymore. Every morning followed the same script. Alarm. Shower. Coffee strong enough to burn away the fog but never strong enough to wake the part of me that used to dream. I learned the comfort of predictability. When nothing changes, nothing can disappoint you. Friends called it first. Texts that said things like, "You good? And let's grab a drink." I answered a few. Made excuses. Eventually they stopped asking. I couldn't blame them. I didn't know how to explain the version of myself I'd become. My father left voicemails. I never listened to them. Some nights, I scrolled through my ex-wife's life from a fake account. Her smile looked practiced now. Confident. Like someone who'd made the right call and didn't feel the need to justify it anymore. I studied the photos longer than I should have, searching for regret. I never found it. So I learned how to shrink. I stopped telling stories about myself. Stopped offering opinions unless asked. Stopped correcting people when they underestimated me. It was easier to let them believe I was exactly what I appeared to be. Harmless, forgettable, temporary. There's a strange safety in becoming invisible. When no one's watching, you can't fail. But invisibility has a cost. Somewhere along the way, I stopped picturing the future entirely. Not because I didn't want one, but because wanting felt reckless. Like touching a bruise just to remind yourself it still hurts. I told myself I was healing. That this quiet life was me being responsible. The truth was harder to admit. I wasn't healing. I was hiding. And the worst part was how easy it became. One night, after a long shift, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked functional. Stable. But there was nothing behind his eyes that suggested hunger or hope. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like relief. Because if I didn't want anything anymore, no one could take it from me. That's what I told myself, anyway. I didn't know it yet, but disappearing isn't the same as starting over. It's just another way of standing still. And eventually, life has a way of noticing who's been trying not to be seen. I used to think regret came from making the wrong choices. I learned it actually comes from remembering the right ones you were too afraid to finish. It started with something small. A conversation at work that wasn't meant to mean anything. One afternoon, a problem came up that no one else wanted to touch. Complicated. Messy. The kind of thing that usually got pushed down the list until it became urgent. I looked at it longer than I needed to, feeling something stir. An old reflex, half forgotten. I solved it in under an hour. When I handed it in, my supervisor blinked like he hadn't expected competence from me. "Didn't know you had that background," he said. Neither did he. That night, the comment followed me home. Not because it was praise, but because it reminded me of a version of myself I'd been pretending didn't exist. I opened a box I hadn't touched since the divorce. Old notebooks. Half-finished plans. A business idea I once pitched with shaking hands and reckless confidence. I remembered how alive I felt back then, even when things were uncertain. Especially when things were uncertain. I sat on the floor flipping through pages, realizing something that made my chest tighten. I hadn't failed back then. I'd gotten scared. Marriage had made the stakes higher. Failure wasn't just mine anymore. It was hers too. And somewhere along the way, I started choosing safety over honesty. Stability over truth. That night, I dreamed about the man I almost became. He stood in rooms I never entered. Took risks I backed away from. He looked tired, but fulfilled. Like someone who'd been knocked down plenty of times and kept getting up anyway. I woke up angry. Not at her. At myself. The anger didn't explode. It simmered. Quiet. Persistent. It followed me into my days, into moments where I caught myself holding back out of habit instead of reason. I started speaking up more at work. Offering ideas before I could talk myself out of them. Watching people actually listen. It terrified me. Hope always does when you've trained yourself not to trust it. One evening, an old contact emailed me. Someone from years ago. Someone who remembered me differently. I heard your name come up, the message read. Didn't know if you were still around. Thought I'd reach out. I stared at the screen for a long time. Responding meant reopening a door I'd sealed shut on purpose. It meant admitting that the version of myself I buried wasn't dead, just waiting. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I sat there, realizing something uncomfortable. I'd spent years telling myself my life got smaller because things didn't work out. But the truth was simpler. I made it smaller. Because small felt controllable. And control felt safer than believing I could be more. As I shut down my computer, one thought refused to let go. The man I almost became wasn't gone. He was still standing somewhere behind me, waiting to see if I'd finally turn around. By the time 6 years passed, I stopped counting them. Not because they went fast, but because counting meant admitting how long I'd been standing still. From the outside, my life finally looked respectable. Steady paycheck, decent credit, a routine so predictable I could run it on autopilot. I paid my bills on time, kept my apartment clean, showed up when expected. If you asked me how I was doing, I would have said, fine. And I would have meant it. That was the problem. Fine became the ceiling, not the floor. I didn't wake up anxious anymore. I didn't dread Mondays. The sharp edges of loss had dulled into something manageable. I told myself this was growth, maturity, proof that I'd learned my lesson. But some nights, when the city quieted down and there was nothing left to distract me, a question crept in. Is this it? Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. I avoided relationships on purpose. Casual conversations stayed casual. Any hint of depth made me retreat. I'd already proven what happened when someone built a future around me. I wasn't risking that again. At work, I was reliable, trusted, invisible in the way dependable men often are. People leaned on me without ever asking what I wanted next. And I let them. It was easier than explaining that I didn't know. Sometimes I caught my reflection in office windows or dark screens. Older, steadier, quieter. A man who'd survived his own collapse. But survival isn't the same as satisfaction. I hadn't failed anymore. I also hadn't chosen anything. The email from the old contact stayed unanswered. Not because I'd forgotten, but because it represented a fork in the road I pretended wasn't there. If I didn't choose, I couldn't choose wrong. That logic worked better than it should have. On a Sunday afternoon, I found myself organizing paperwork I hadn't touched in years. Old files from the marriage. Bank statements. Legal documents I never bothered to fully understand. I told myself I was being responsible. Still, my hands lingered on a folder labeled Final. I didn't open it. Instead, I stacked it neatly with the others and slid it back into the drawer. That night, lying in bed, I admitted something I'd avoided for a long time. I wasn't afraid of failing anymore. I was afraid that this quiet, manageable life was exactly what I deserved. And if that was true, then wanting more wasn't bravery. It was arrogance. The thought settled heavy in my chest. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of traffic, and felt a strange tension build. Not panic. Pressure. Like something unfinished was slowly, patiently making its way back to me. I had no idea how close it already was. The phone rang at a time when nothing ever rang. Early afternoon. Middle of the workday. An unknown number lighting up the screen like a mistake. I almost let it go to voicemail. Habit told me that anything unexpected was either a problem I didn't need or a conversation I wasn't prepared to have. I answered anyway. Is this? The voice paused, careful, professional. He said my full name, the one I hadn't heard spoken out loud in years. Yes, I said, and immediately wondered why my throat felt tight. This is Daniel Mercer. I'm an attorney. I've been trying to reach you for some time. I stared out the window at nothing in particular. The city kept moving. Cars passed. People lived their lives. Whatever this was, it hadn't slowed anything down but me. I believe you were previously married to, he said her name. Hearing it felt like stepping on glass you thought you'd already cleaned up. I don't handle personal matters, I said too quickly. If this is about. It's not about reconciliation, he cut in gently. And it's not about reopening old wounds. But it is about something that was left unresolved. That word stuck. Unresolved. He explained just enough to make my pulse pick up and not enough to calm it. A decision made years ago. Paperwork signed under pressure. An asset tied to something I walked away from without looking back. At the time, he said, you removed yourself before the matter concluded. I thought of the folder labeled final. Of all the drawers I never opened. Why now? I asked. There's been a development, he said. And legally, you're still connected to it. Connected. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly aware of my breathing. Of the way my life had been carefully constructed to avoid words like that. I'm not interested in revisiting the past, I said. There was a pause on the line. Long enough to feel intentional. Respectfully, he replied, the past seems to be revisiting you. He gave me a deadline. A date circled in someone else's calendar that now belonged to me. If I didn't respond, decisions would be made without my input. I laughed quietly after we hung up. Not because it was funny, but because some part of me recognized the pattern. I'd spent years letting things be decided for me. It had always felt safer that way. The rest of the day passed in fragments. Conversations I didn't fully hear. Tasks I completed on muscle memory alone. That call sat in the back of my mind, tapping patiently. That night, I pulled the folder from the drawer. Final. The word looked different now. I opened it. Inside were signatures I barely remembered making. Decisions I'd rushed through because staying felt harder than leaving. I saw my own handwriting and realized something unsettling. I hadn't just walked away from my marriage. I'd walked away from myself. The lawyer's words echoed back. You didn't lose everything. You walked away before the ending. I sat there long after midnight, papers spread across the table, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope. Responsibility. Whatever this was, ignoring it would be a choice. And for the first time in years, choosing nothing felt more dangerous than choosing wrong. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. I folded the documents carefully. Tomorrow, I would have to decide whether I was ready to finish what I started. I didn't sleep much after that. Not because my mind was racing, but because it was finally still enough to hear what I'd been avoiding. The documents sat on my kitchen table like a quiet accusation. No drama. No threats. Just facts. Dates. Signatures. Proof that a younger version of me had made choices under pressure and then disappeared before facing the consequences. I kept telling myself I was protecting everyone back then. Myself. But as I read through the pages again, something uncomfortable settled in. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was retreating. Every memory that surfaced seemed to point to the same pattern. When things got uncertain, I stepped back. When commitment demanded courage, I chose control instead. I called it being practical. Responsible. It was fear. Fear of being exposed. Fear of failing loudly. Fear that if I gave everything and still came up short, there would be no excuses left. The realization didn't come gently. It made me angry. Angry at the man who let one word define him. Angry at how easily I accepted the smallest version of myself just to avoid disappointment. Angry that I'd mistaken numbness for peace. I went for a long walk that night. No music. No distractions. Just the sound of my own footsteps keeping time with thoughts I couldn't outrun anymore. Somewhere along the way, the anger shifted. Into clarity. I hadn't been abandoned by life. I'd abandoned it first. Standing under a flickering streetlight, I finally said the truth out loud. I didn't fail. The words felt strange in my mouth. I quit believing I deserved more. Saying it didn't erase the years. It didn't rewrite the marriage or undo the choices I made. But it did something just as important. It put the responsibility back where it belonged. With me. When I got home, I emailed the lawyer. 3 sentences. Direct. I told him I was ready to review everything. That I wanted to understand my options. That I would not disappear this time. Hitting send felt heavier than any resignation letter I'd ever written. Because this wasn't about leaving. It was about staying. A reply came faster than I expected. A meeting scheduled. Names mentioned. Including hers. I stared at the screen longer than necessary, feeling the old reflex kick in, the urge to step back, to delay, to let time soften the edges. I didn't. For the first time, I noticed something different in myself. The fear was still there. It just wasn't in charge anymore. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, realizing this was the moment everything had been building toward. Not the meeting, not the money, but the decision to stop running from my own life. Whatever came next would require me to face the past head-on. And for the first time in years, I was willing to stand there and take it. I thought I was prepared. That's the lie men like me tell themselves before walking into rooms they've spent years avoiding. The conference room was too bright, too clean. Everything about it felt designed to keep emotions out and decisions tidy. I arrived early, sat with my hands folded, and reminded myself to breathe. When she walked in, time didn't slow down like it does in movies. It accelerated. She looked not happier, not smug, just settled. Like someone who'd made her peace with the past and didn't feel the need to carry it around anymore. For a brief moment, I felt the old imbalance tilt the room. The instinct to measure myself against her. To wonder who came out ahead. Then something surprising happened. I didn't care. The lawyer spoke first, outlining details, obligations, numbers that would have once felt like judgment. I listened without shrinking, without bracing for impact. She spoke next. I didn't think you'd show up, she said. I met her eyes. Not defensively. Not apologetically. I almost didn't, I said. But I'm done disappearing. The words landed between us, solid and calm. She studied me for a second longer than necessary. You're different, she said. I didn't rush to correct her. No, I said. I remembered who I was before I got scared. There was the moment I used to rehearse in my head during sleepless nights. The chance to explain myself. To justify the years. To defend the man I used to be. I didn't do any of that. Instead, I said the truth. I wasn't ready for the life we wanted, I said. And I punished both of us for it by pretending I didn't care. She nodded slowly. Not in forgiveness. Not in agreement. In recognition. We finished the meeting without drama. No raised voices. No emotional monologues. Just clarity. Boundaries. Closure that didn't need to be announced. When we stood to leave, she hesitated. For what it's worth, she said, I never thought you were weak. I smiled, not bitterly. Not triumphantly. I know, I said. I just believed it myself. Outside, the air felt lighter than it had in years. Not because I'd won something, but because I hadn't tried to. Walking away, I realized I wasn't replaying the conversation. I wasn't rewriting it or wishing I'd said more. That was new. I hadn't needed her to see me differently. I already did. And that changed everything. For a long time, I thought closure would feel louder. Like a door slamming shut. Like relief rushing in all at once. Instead, it felt like waking up and realizing I no longer needed to check the lock. Life didn't change overnight after that meeting. My mornings looked the same. Same streets. Same coffee. Same quiet apartment. But something subtle had shifted beneath the routine. I was no longer living on pause. I started answering calls instead of letting them ring. Not all of them. Just the ones that mattered. I had dinner with my father for the first time in years. We didn't rehash the past. We talked about ordinary things. The weather. The way time sneaks up on you if you're not paying attention. It was enough. At work, I stopped pretending I didn't want more. I didn't announce it. I didn't demand anything. I simply raised my hand when opportunities showed up and trusted myself to handle whatever followed. Some worked out. Some didn't. Neither outcome felt like a verdict. I let myself imagine again. Not recklessly. Not desperately. Just honestly. I thought about what kind of life felt worth the effort. Not impressive, not safe, but real. There was no grand plan. No dramatic reinvention. Just direction. One evening, as I walked home under a sky streaked with fading light, I realized something that made me stop mid-step. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. Not to her. Not to the man I used to be. Not even to myself. I had spent years believing my value was something that could be lost, taken, or confirmed by someone else's opinion. Now I understood the truth. My life wasn't something I had to earn back. It was something I had to participate in. Later that night, I opened the drawer where the old photo used to live. The frame was empty now. Not because I'd destroyed it, but because I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't chasing the man I once was. I was choosing the man I was becoming. As I turned off the lights and sat with the quiet, it no longer felt hollow. It felt open. And for the first time in a very long while, the future didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an invitation. One I was finally ready to accept.